boys and girls! Hi! Are you ready? We're going to read a new chapter of the Twits. What's going to happen today? What chapter are Peppy and I going to read for you today? Peppy, today we're going to find out what's going to happen with Mrs. Twit. What is going to happen? She has the shrinks. She is shrinking. Se está encogiendo. She's becoming smaller and smaller and smaller. Is she really shrinking? Let's find out. Okay, so the chapter today is called Mrs. Twits Gets a Stretching. A stretching is un estirón. She gets a stretching, okay? Mr. Twit led Mrs. Twit outdoors to the garden where he had everything ready for the great stretching. He had 100 balloons and lots of string. He had a gas cylinder for filling the balloons. He had fixed an iron ring into the ground. "Stand here," he said, pointing to the iron ring. When that was done, he began filling the balloons with the gas. Each balloon was on a long string, and when it was filled with gas, it pulled on the string, trying to go up. You know, balloons with gas float. So each balloon with the string, it floated up, right? Mr. Twit tied each end of the string onto the top of Mrs. Twit's body. Some he tied around her neck. So he tied the strings of the balloons around her neck. Some under her arms. Some to her wrists. Some on her wrists. And some to her hair. So Mrs. Twits had balloons tied to the end of her hair, to her wrists, to her arms, to her neck. Okay, so she had string all over herself, holding up with balloons with gas, okay? Soon there were 50 colored balloons floating in the air around Mrs. Twit's head. "Can you feel them stretching you?" said Mr. Twit. "I can! I can!" cried Mrs. Twit. "They are stretching me like mad!" He put another 10 balloons. They started pulling even stronger. He put another 10 balloons. Mrs. Twit was quite helpless now. She couldn't really move. Her feet were tied to the ground. Her arms were pulled upwards with the balloons. So she couldn't really move. She was like a prisoner. Okay? And Mr. Twit intended to go away and leave her there all night, or maybe a couple of days, you know, to teach her a lesson. And then Mrs. Twit opened her mouth and said something very, very silly. There are all the colored balloons. They are tied on her hair, tied on her wrists, tied on her arms, tied on her neck. And there are, you know, she's tied on her ankles, tied to the ring on the floor. And there's the gas. And Mr. Twit is even putting more balloons, right? His plan, his initial plan, was to leave Mrs. Twit there. Le pensaba dejar ahí un par de días y noches, castigada por la fea broma, right? The bad joke. That's what he was planning to do. And then she said something, dijo algo, something silly, algo tonto. Are you sure my feet are properly tied to the ground? What if those strings on my ankle break and then it's goodbye for me? I'm going to float up in the air. And that gave Mr. Twit an idea for his second nasty idea. There is enough pull to take her to the moon. I think that if these balloons break, they will take me to the moon, she cried. To take you to the moon? Said Mr. Twit. What a ghastly thought! We wouldn't want that to happen to you, my dear. Oh, no, we wouldn't. We most certainly wouldn't. Put more string on my ankles, quickly. I want to feel absolutely safe. Oh, very well, my angel, of course. So, with a ghoulish grin, he knelt down and he took a knife out of his pocket, and with a quick slash, he cut some of the strings that were holding her ankles to the iron ring. And she went up like a rocket. Help! Save me! But there was no saving now. In a few seconds, she went up into the blue sky. Woo! She went up into the blue sky, climbing and climbing and climbing fast. Mr. Twit stood below, holding up. What a pretty sight! How lovely those balloons look up in the air, my dear! And what a marvelous bit of luck for me! At last, the old hag is gone and lost forever! Mr. Twit thought that Mrs. Twit was gone forever. There is Mrs. Twit going up in the air. The strings are cut, and Mr. Twit is down in the ground looking up. There is the knife that he used to cut all the strings, and Mrs. Twit is floating in the air with her walking stick. Oh, she goes up, 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 up in the sky. Mrs. Twit may have been ugly, and she may have been beastly, but she was not stupid. High up in the air, she had a very bright idea. If I can get rid of some of these balloons, she said to herself, I will stop going up and I will start coming down. She began biting some of the strings off, and she started biting the strings that were on her wrists, biting off. the balloons, and biting off the balloons that were holding up to her wrists and arms and neck and hair. Each time she bit through a string and let the balloon float away, the upward pull started letting go, and the rate of climb slowed down. When she had bitten through 20 strings, 20, she stopped going up altogether. She stayed still in the air. Very, very slowly, she began to come down. Okay? There was no wind that day, so she went up straight, and now she was coming straight down on top of her own garden, right? And because of this, Mrs. Tweet had gone absolutely straight up, and she began to come absolutely straight down. As she floated gently down, Mrs. Twit's skirt, petticoat, billowed out like a parachute. Se infló como un paracaídas, su pollera, showing her knickers. Se veía su bombacha. Her knickers were showing. Oh, it was a grand sight on a glorious day, and thousands of birds came flying in from miles around to stare at this extraordinary woman. Okay? In the sky, the birds were looking at this woman that was floating in the sky. Okay? There she is. Look at her skirt. It looks like a parachute, and all the little birdies are coming to look at her. And there she is biting the string off so that she can go down. Okay? Mr. Twit gets a horrid shock. Mr. Twit thought he had seen the last of his ugly wife for the last time, and he was sitting in the garden drinking some beer, celebrating. He was so happy, and Mrs. Twit came floating down very silently. Okay? When she was about the height of the roof of the house, Mr. Twit heard her voice. "Here I come, you beastly old grunion, you rotten old turnip, you filthy old trumpet!" Mr. Twit jumped as though he had been stung by a giant wasp. He dropped his beer. He looked up. He gasped. And a few sounds came out of his mouth. "I'll get you for this," said Mrs. Twit. She was floating right on top of him, and so she started hitting him with her cane, with her walking stick. So she started, ow, 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 ow. She started hitting him with her walking stick on the head. Okay? Mrs. Twit was purple with rage. She was so angry. She was red and blue and purple. She was yelling at him. You terrible old goat, old turnip, I'll get you for this. I'm gonna get you for this. You. Okay? And Mr. Twit was trying to save himself, but she was hitting him. And before he could run away, all the balloons were tangled with him, and she landed on him, aterrizó sobre él, with his petticoat and the stick and everything, and she crashed on top of his body. Okay, so this is what happened. She fell, Mrs. Twit fell on top of him with the balloons, with the beer, with the cane. Everything was a mess. Okay, very messy. That's where he got surprised when she started yelling at him, "You old goat!" And then when she fell on him, hitting him. And that's the end. Okay, so if you want to know what happens next, you will have to wait for next week, okay? Okay, I love you. Bye.